Hello, this is Surreal. I just returned from a very exciting weekend at SHUX 2019, and so this will be another rambling episode as I kind of go through what happened. So, if you've never heard of it, SHUX is a board game convention in Vancouver, Canada, for Shut Up and Sit Down, which is an online board game review channel. And I've been helping out. This was the third year, and I help out every year, so typically I'm helping with transporting the game's library and merchandise and equipment from Kelowna, where I live, down to Vancouver and then back afterwards, and then I help with the setup and takedown of the event. But as part of that, I get to hang out during the event as well, so while everything's going on, I get to experience that. So this year was pretty exciting because it was the first year that I've done a Megagame. And if you don't know what a Megagame is, it is a large group of people, so I think had about 30 or 40 people in it. And the one I did, I can only speak for the one I did. It's basically we were grouped into many different ships. So the story behind it was that the Earth has been destroyed or we were attacked and only a few people, like it's in the future, so a few people on different spaceships essentially had escaped and were now traveling together as a fleet. And this is Den of Wolves, so maybe a few spoilers coming up, so if you are planning on doing this one, you might not want to listen to this. So we're all broken into different ships, and we each get a role associated with that ship. So there was a battleship, for example, where the admiral of the fleet stayed with his crew. We had a ship where the president of the people and their entourage lived. There was a medical ship, a refinery ship, a prison ship, etc. And I was actually part of the crew of a luxury cruise liner. So we were a larger ship, and we had the bulk of, a lot of the civilian population lived on our ship, but also the government council met on our ship. So there were a lot of different factions or nations represented in this fleet. And so they all had council members, not all of them, which is one of the political topics that came up, but most of them had representatives in this council. So the president and the council would meet on the ship that I was on. And so on my ship, we had 4 players. So we had a captain, a first officer, an engineer, and me, who was a council member. So I met with the government. And then these positions would be broken down into different roles. So the captain, of course, kind of oversees the operation of the vessel overall. And our captain in general was taking a lot of orders from the admiral to do things like interrogating people to trying to find infiltrators from the bad guys. Spies, basically. Our first officer ended up kind of having to be in charge. He's technically in charge of the fighters and the security team, but he had to kind of do a lot of the work to try to get resources for the ship. Because our ship produced some resources, but not enough to sustain itself. And then the engineer, so each table was a ship, and then you have a big panel that shows you all the different parts of your ship. So you'd have this is the food replicating room, or machine. These are the jump drive engine, etc., etc. And so he's in charge of allocating resources to the different parts of the ship as well as crew. So we have you have different crew members he could allocate to man the different parts of the ship. And none of the ships produce enough resources to be self-sufficient, so a big part of the game is going around to other ships and trying to make trades. If that ship produces a lot of water, then what can we give them to get some water off of them, for example. And in the beginning, it was really interesting as a psychological look into how people behave in times of stress. Because even though it's a game and nobody really took it more seriously than a game, you could see how society collapsed throughout the game in kind of funny ways. So we started off, everyone was trying to be very benevolent and work together, and everything went well for a couple of rounds. But then things started to happen. We'd occasionally get attacked by these bad guys, and we'd have to fight them off, but then ships would get damaged. The food ship would get damaged, and not enough food's getting produced anymore. So people start hoarding and even hiding their resources so people don't come and try to take them. So you start getting tension that way. Some ships were feeling overlooked in the political arena. So a lot of my game was actually spent in the council chamber. During combat, as a council member, I had nothing to do. Everybody would go to so I didn't even know what happened in combat. The combat table was separate from me. It was like the battleship and the first officers usually were doing that. I was usually in meetings, and we would just carry our political meetings on during combat, because everybody was stuck on, if this combat starts, you're all stuck on your ship, whatever ship you were on when it started, and generally all the political people would be on my ship when we attacked, so we just carry on with the meetings. We would be talking about things that affected the entire fleet, so it was hard for me to really protect the interests of my ship 100%, because the council doesn't care about just my ship. So we were kind of discussing the fleet-wide concerns, like, how can we ensure that resources are being shared fairly? Do we need to pass any laws to control how people are hiding their resources? A lot of times we were trying to rein in the admiral. We're like, okay, the admiral's doing things that we don't necessarily support. We're going to pass a law that he has to run it through us before he interrogates people, for example, on suspicion of being bad guys, So the admiral, I think, actually was kind of turning against us because we kept kind of stripping his power away. But then just weird stuff started going down. So we had one situation where we saw a vessel, somebody was sending out like a distress signal or something. And we had to decide as a council if we were going to respond to it or just leave, because we didn't know, first of all, because they were telling us, I think, that there was a bunch of refugees. And so we had to discuss, well, we don't really have the supplies to care for any more people, was one issue. But also we suspected it could be a trap set by the wolves, the bad guys. And so as a council, we voted on it and decided that we would jump away just to be safe. But there was one ship that really wanted to go back and see what was going on over there. So we made a space jump. So it's just kind of like we jumped to like a warp drive sort of a thing. We jumped to it, or maybe more like hyperdrive in Star Wars, where you kind of just jump to another point in space. But all the ships need to jump together to the same location, which was generally given us by the admiral. And so basically when it came time to jump, everybody has to write in the coordinates on their sheet and then hold up a sign that says they're jumping, and then moderators come around and make sure you wrote down the right number, because otherwise you go to a different location. What we found at one of our jumps is that 2 ships didn't come with us. So one ship, so we didn't know what happened, actually. We thought they defected, perhaps, to the other side. They got removed from the room. They got taken somewhere else. And we didn't know what was going on with them. And so this kind of turned into the first major schism that we had, because the admiral ordered the captain of my ship to go back to where those ships went to. Because one of them, I can't remember if it was a mining ship or something, but it's one we really needed. We needed supplies from them. And so he sent us back with an armed escort to make sure whatever was going on, we needed that ship. Whether either they needed our help or we needed to force them to come back. And so the president did not want us to leave. He wanted us to jump with the rest of the fleet instead of going back. So the fleet was going to jump. They gave us the coordinates to which they were going to jump, and they were telling us to jump back to our previous location to find those 2 ships. President wasn't having it. He said, no, we're jumping with the rest of the fleet. Because he was on our ship, actually. The whole council was on our ship at the time. So I was like, no, we're not going back. We are going forward. But the captain of my ship opted to follow the orders of the admiral. And this is part of the reason a lot of people started to suspect that he was a bad guy, and maybe the admiral was too. So we jumped, and then my ship, all of us that were on my ship, had to go to this other room to see what was going on with the 2 that had disappeared earlier. And we found out that one of those ships simply hadn't jumped because they didn't have enough crew. They didn't have anybody manning the jump station when everybody else jumped. We hadn't waited for it. They didn't have anybody to put in that, to drive that function of their ship. So they just got left behind. And then the other ones had actually gone back because they wanted to investigate, I think, that signal, the ship, the refugee ship. And they also suspected that our ship was bad, and we came at them with an armed escort and everything. So then we jumped. And they'd been sabotaged. Somebody had been sabotaging their drives and stuff like that. And one of the ships was actually a news media ship, and they had been, they have news broadcasts all the time, and they kind of walk around and listen to what's going on and writing notes and things like that. And one of the media guys had given them a jump coordinate which had been wrong. So we thought, okay, he's quite possibly a bad guy for giving the wrong number. And he said it was a typo. And so their ship had written the wrong code on their board, and my captain had seen one of the guys on that ship change the code. And so he thought he was sabotaging their destination location, so they'd go to the wrong place, so they're forever lost to the fleet. And so our ship and their ship became kind of very suspicious of each other. So I ended up going onto their ship to jump back to the rest of the fleet, because I was with the president and everything like that, and he had moved to the icebreaker because he no longer trusted my captain on our ship where the council met. So we jumped back to join the battleship, and the president moved the council meeting area to the battleship. But I went back to my ship, and then my captain had gone to that ship and to talk to them to see what was, I guess, question them or see what was going on. And while he was on that ship, he was poisoned. And we thought that ship that he was on had poisoned him. And so he wasn't dead, he had been moved to the medical ship. And when I went to the medical ship to see what was going on, they just said they had been holding him there. They wouldn't let him go. And they just told me they didn't have the supplies to heal him, but the captain's like, no, they're keeping me here. Like, I'm a prisoner here. And so at this point, everything was already falling apart. A lot of the different ships were already kind of plotting their own, what they needed to do and stuff like that. And at some point, the admiral had taken security teams on a transport to go talk to the icebreaker, which is the ship that we were suspicious of, that we thought had poisoned my captain. So he was flying over there with a couple transports of security officers. But he didn't bring any fighter support, and so this other ship shot him down, so he actually killed the admiral of the fleet. And so at this point, all of us thought, yeah, that ship has definitely gone rogue. They've gone bad, right? They work for the bad guys now. Or if they didn't, they've defected or something. We're obviously very suspicious, but then everything was just falling apart to the point where all the ships were now just looking out for themselves. We basically went Lord of the Flies, right? So we were arresting people on suspicion of being traitors all over the place. And eventually, we managed to beat the bad guy in a final combat. But the fleet loyalty had fractured to the point that there were a few ships that actually just took off on their own at the end. And my ship was one of them. So we never got our captain back. So at the end of the fight, me and the chief engineer and the first officer, who basically became captain now that our captain was gone, we decided, you know what? Our luxury cruise liner produces enough food and water on its own that if we culled about 70% of the civilian population on the ship, we could just live on our own, self-sustaining. We wouldn't have a fuel source, but we could just drift through space and have enough food and water forever. So we opted to do that, and so we just jumped to a random location. And then, and did that. So, there was a couple other ships, too, that just took off on their own at the end. It was very intense, very exciting. I really enjoyed myself there doing that. So I was really glad I did that. It was about a 6-hour thing. And then, the people that were in my crew, and as well as most of the crew of the battleship, they were actually a group of friends that had come from Australia. And there were 5 Megagames over the weekend. They did all of them. That's all they did, really. But anyways, that was a big event for me over the weekend. A couple other cool things, too. So this is a board game convention. So after my mega game, I spent the rest of the weekend basically just playing board games and stuff like that with people. And I won one. So there's actually one called Glyph Chess. So it's fairly expensive, but I really liked it. So I was like, I don't know if I want to buy it, but I really wanted to win it. There was a games table where they'd have play to win on it. So what you could do is you could check the games out, play them, and then when you gave it back, they would give you a ticket for a draw. So, or if you took it to teach somebody how to play, you could get a ticket as well. And so I did that and got my tickets, and they did the draw on Sunday, but I didn't win. But whoever did win didn't claim it. So I've heard a couple stories. So they did show up, apparently, but either they didn't want to transport that size of a game, like they were flying somewhere far away and didn't want to have to pay for the transport, or the box had been damaged during play. Like, people had been playing it a lot over the weekend, so it kind of got a little, worn. So they didn't want it because it had like the box, one of the corners had ripped. And or it could be a combination, like maybe they would have shipped it, maybe they would have been happy taking it on the airplane if it was in new condition, but because it had been ripped, they were like, no, I don't want it anymore. But either way, they redrew any of the games that hadn't been picked up, and so this went back on the list for a redraw, and then I won the redraw, so that was really exciting. And that's actually the second game I've won at SHUX, because in the first year, I won a game of Twilight Imperium Force and got it signed by the lead developer and one of the artists. I think maybe the lead artist signed it. So I have a signed copy of that I won as well in the first year. So yeah, really cool. So I had a lot of fun. Drove through the night. Well, I didn't have to drive this year. So normally I drive, like the first year I drove my van, but basically we could fit most of the stuff in my van, and then a couple people with cars took a couple boxes as well. But mostly the whole stuff for the convention fit in my van the first year. And then in the last year, I rented a U-Haul, a 10-foot U-Haul, and we filled that up and took that down. So it grew quite a bit from year 1 to year 2. And this year, we had to end up getting like a 26-footer. It was a much larger truck. We didn't fill it, but we definitely needed it. So because the convention's just been growing pretty big. But I didn't have to drive. I went with the truck, but a friend drove this year. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And just wanted to report back on my weekend. So still working on a more animated video to post later, but I'm kind of enjoying just doing these rambling videos as well. So I know there's not a lot so much to watch on it besides me floating in the clouds here, but I hope you enjoyed it and have a wonderful day.